Our next session is platform pricing really heading to zero. And we've got three distinguished panelists to help us discuss that. Indy Singh, Arnie Selvarajah, thank Arnie, and Anantha Ayer, the country head for Avaloq, who there we are. If you could all come up and join me on the stage, and if you could please welcome them all. And is that some last minute coaching, Indy?
Is this the Indian subcontinent meeting or what?
There's a lack of diversity on this panel, I think.
Oh, it shows we're taking over, folks.
I could go so far with that, but I won't. All right. Well, look, I remember saying to a CEO of a platform some years ago, do you think that this largely, the vanilla part of what you do becomes a commodity and that effectively it's free? He said, oh, absolutely. I'm gearing us up for that now. I realize in a sense that's stealing the thunder, but why don't we, Arnie, can I start with you? Let's get to those questions about zero in a little bit, but we've had some interesting news in the recent times. What do we need in pricing? What is good pricing? And what do you make of the BT Panorama, or BT Open, sorry? And I mean, talk about a public pricing announcement.
Yeah, I think as an overarching statement, I think one of the things we need in pricing is simplicity. I think as an industry we're quite cynical about how we price, and we make it more and more complex for clients to actually compare. So, you know, the session we just talked about in trying to bring some comparability to pricing in a standardized way is actually an admirable endeavor. So my take on the BT Panorama announcement is, in fact, that it's a cynical attempt to get a headline by reducing a headline rate, but by then disaggregating pricing to the point that effectively it's still more expensive than a NetWealth or a OneView or a Premium or a Hub, but they've achieved a lot of PR in that process by doing so. So if you add up all of the components of the pricing within the BT Open platform, there is the asset-based fee, there's a fixed admin fee, there's a cost recovery fee, which doesn't exist in any of the other platforms. And on top of that, there's about a 210 basis point margin on the cash account. So if you add all those things up together, it is actually more expensive. So my observation around pricing is that we really need to make it more simple and be less cynical about how we're pricing for the consumer.
Indy, would you like to add to that?
I think BT also have a fee for reporting to the legislator, and they actually give 28 bips to their clients in cash, while we give something like 85, I think, or 58, or something like that. I think, absolutely right, Arnie. I think the way the government might come across when they see this kind of stuff is to say, all right, put on a table, starting with $50,000, going up to say $2 million, what it would actually cost a client, assuming one transaction for every $50,000, and switching fee about 2 or 3 times. And if you want to do SMAs, how many transactions you have of shares and what the brokerage and the cost per transaction is. And then you suddenly find, as Arnie said, BT is actually quite expensive. So at one of our practice development days just a week ago, this was raised by one of the planners, and I said, look folks, I'm more than happy to switch to this kind of pricing because I'll make a lot more money than I am. So if you go back and do your sums the way I just said, look at the minimum charge, just put 0.5% flat or 0.6%, and you'll see which one's actually cheaper.
So really, we need to start reporting on a total cost of ownership to the client. That's what.
It's something like the difference between a managed expense ratio and an indirect cost ratio. An equivalent sort of comparison for platforms might be a little more useful tool. And at other parts of the world, have you got any examples or illustrations?
I think it's pretty much the similar everywhere. You know, whether there is going to be you want to give a transparency, a simplicity, but at the same time, there should be a transparency. What do you get out of that too? So I think somebody referred to MiFID too. I think that's pretty much driving almost every conversation, about, at least from our home country in Switzerland and Europe.
It's not India.
No, it's not. I think where shoot to the stone out there. I think where it comes in it's more regulatory driven transparency and proving why we charge for what. It's becoming there. I think that's pretty much the path we're going to go down there.
So let's extend further on what change is needed there. How would you make it, besides maybe the equivalent of an ICR, other thoughts on how to make it simple? Because I think it's fair to say, and one of the criticisms that we would get as an industry, and one of the areas that the Royal Commission is interrogating is in fact that it's almost impenetrable for the average person. In fact, it's almost impenetrable for some of our industry to actually figure out what the pricing really is, what the total cost really is.
I think we need to look at it in different segments. So if you look at the lower end of the segment, probably an all-inclusive, and specifically mentioning what does it include, how many transactions, how many switching, what it means. There are days of, I think it's only where the platforms take in between, where about the cash or whether there is taking a position on arbitrage in between, that's going to vanish. Not immediately, but it's going to go down. So if you segment it and say that it's, let's say, 0.5 or 0.6 basis points, all inclusive, includes 100 transactions and so many cash and cash sweeps every day, that covers pretty much the lower end of the segment. The higher end of the segment, you are adding more value-added services. So that's going to be slightly different, and those are much more financially more educated people or more aware, so they will have different needs. And that pricing need not necessarily be simplistic, but needs to be transparent. That's where so there's going to be a different pricing for the different segments of the market. That's what's going to go to.
So how do we make it transparent, Arnie? Any thoughts? Because I think I like the analogy of glass is pretty transparent, but if you line up about 30 pieces of glass, there's too much transparency to be able to see through. And that's my analogy for the average client getting a 60-page SOA with 10 PDSs and anywhere from 400 to 700 pages that in theory they've read in order to be fully informed and make that decision. And I've got to tell you, I've never even put the CD-ROM from my financial planner into my laptop to even look at them.
So I think that it's difficult. I think RG97 goes a little way towards that. But once again, each of the firms will interpret RG97 in a different way and come up with a different result, which doesn't really ultimately achieve the outcome for some kind of standardized comparability for the consumer. The challenge for us is if we don't do it, the regulator will. So in my mind, it's better for us to be proactive on this and come to a way that we can actually allow our end consumer, the ultimate client, to be able to compare those services. And it goes to transparency, but it also goes to building trust back in the industry. And I think that's paramount for us as an industry.
With respect, Ani, I think the regulator tried RG97, and most of the industry participants, the fund managers, are saying someone's lying about their fees and people aren't disclosing it properly, and so they got a specialist consultant to come in and review the whole thing, who's come out with another 20, 30 points of what need to be looked at. Look, fact of life is, I think, as Chris said 2 nights ago, he said, it's capitalism. This is a business. You disclose what you want and people need to make up their minds as well. Maybe it's got to be in bigger print, than the fine print that BT's put at the bottom and others put as well, to say, look, you can put money in, that's the basic fee, but these are the other charges, and you work it out yourself. Selling it, if you can sell it better, good luck to you. I think that's what makes a market, and some people disclose it better than others, as BT have, and the headline rate looks good. And as far as cash is concerned also, I think, Ananta, it's very difficult to actually quantify what the margin is. Is BT doing the right thing when they pay people 0.28% and lend it out at 7? I mean, how far do you go with that, and how much cash do you actually keep? And do you allow people to have cash in as a component, as we don't? We just say, look, there'll be 0.3%, sorry, 3%, which will use to pay your pension payments and withdrawals and fees and charges. And then we top it up so you don't crystallize a capital gain or capital loss. I think it's an open market, and I don't think there's any easy solution. And if the government does come in, as it did with RG97, there's going to be complaints again. Or, as I said to ASIC once, I said, look, folks, just tell everyone it's going to be 0.3 or 0.4, full stop. And which one's the cheapest then?
So, Indy, I agree. We're in a capitalistic society, and we all have the right to make money. But I actually think that's the reason you want to make it more simplified, because we know there's about 6 million Australians out there who would get advice if they could participate or engage in a way that they were comfortable with. So there's an opportunity for us to get a substantially higher number of clients engaged in our industry if we make it simple for them to understand it and to compare it and understand the value of what they're getting.
I think clients actually, when they walk in to see, as you said, a planner, they really look for the fine print and they really look for the fees. They come for service and value. And if you can give them service and value, the fee becomes incidental. Years ago, I remember when IPAC was around, Arun Avi, I went in to see him, and he had on the whiteboard at the back, he said, the fees are in our heads, not in the clients. And I think people come for value and advice, as I think Marie, the lady from Macquarie said, and you said too. So if you can disclose what you can disclose, and people prefer to go there, maybe they want to go to BT for the security of Westpac. They go to Macquarie, they think Fiducian is small, I'd rather not go there. That's their choice. And if you disclose everything clearly, well, people actually are not that dumb. As Rory said to us 2 nights ago, and we got stuck into him, and he said, well, people don't understand. I said, give me a break, mate. I've had barristers know about barristers going in with earning millions of dollars a year, walk up with celery bags in their hands, unshaven, and saying, oh, this advisor put us in this product, we didn't know. Well, hang on. You went through the whole bloody process. You knew exactly what's going on. You took the risk. Now you don't want to take the responsibility. So I think...
Indy, I need to slow you down. To be honest, I don't fully agree with you on that, because I actually think there's an information asymmetry that is substantial between our industry and the client. But let's move on to another, and we'll probably pick some of that up again. I want to ask initially Arnie and then Anantha, and then I think you'll enjoy responding to this one, Indy. Can we get to zero? And what does zero mean, Arnie?
There's no such thing as a free lunch, right? We all know that. And the platforms that purport to be free, and not necessarily in our industry, we've subsequently found out are not free. There's a cost. It may not necessarily be a financial cost, but there's a cost. This morning, we saw news about Trivago being sued because it became apparent that they were promoting or had better recommendations for those businesses that were actually paying them. Right? So it's a free platform. It's a free recommendation platform, but as it turned out, it wasn't. And it wasn't a specific cost to the consumer using it, but it wasn't free. So I don't believe we'll get to free. I would prefer for us to get to transparent and to be simple and clear.
I agree with that. I think it's in the internet, as they say, if it's free, you are the product. It's going to be the same way. I don't think it's going to go through. There's a tremendous amount of work involved in investing in the technology, doing the analytics, putting the ecosystem together. That's not going to come to free. If it is free, they want you and your data. That's all it is all about.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think if you don't get paid, Mike doesn't get a salary, I don't get a salary, fine. Staff don't get paid, systems don't cost anything, the administrators do work for free, the building doesn't cost anything, you don't pay rent, hey, you can have it free. But how are we going to live, mate? You know? Well, it's a ridiculous expectation. Have you people invested in iShares and stuff like that? You know, we wanted some index exposure for the fixed interest area, and we put money in iShares, little bit of index. And every month, if index is 0.4, the iShare is 0.2. If the index is minus 0.1, iShares is minus 0.3. Is there no fee? So I said, look, get out of these bloody iShares, pay the fee to a fund manager, 0.15, and get index, mate. There's nothing free, mate.
I do know where you can get go to an industry fund and get a genuinely free. It's an outstanding option.
I think you should ask Paul that, mate.
No, I'm not going to ask Paul because it's not his fund. With apologies, Paul. But you could argue it's not free because what they've done is go to an active manager and say, well, you believe you can add value. We actually want the index. You can keep anything.
Oh, there are enough managers who do that. There are enough people who say, look, my fee is 0, but I'll take 20% over the top if I get index, or 30%. If you want to do that, go for it.
And then the client actually pays 0.
Oh, client doesn't pay 0, man. The client pays a fee because the 30% is gone.
Yeah. But it's a genuine
And it's
index.
much more than paying the fund manager 0.5. I can guarantee you that.
If they perform. But if they underperform, and we
Made
know
in
the
a
stats,
rising market, all boats get lifted.
and in a falling market,
Well, they don't get paid, but they've already picked up 1.5% along the way,
well,
instead of 0.4.
so we're talking about risk now, which is where one of the things I wanted to get to. So, Indy, how much is administration a commodity? I mean, I'm talking about the vanilla administration of trading, etc. See, there's bells and whistles for people who can pay for it, like Anantha said, but the core platform services that we log in and get, it seems to me that's becoming more and more of a commodity, and that part might be free in order to get some of the other things.
But nothing is free if you have staff or you pay for systems that are going to execute that. You have to pay for the systems to develop them. Now maybe Ananta's technology is superior to ours, but we've developed systems which automate that transaction. Ani might know something better. But there's no free lunch no matter what you say, mate. People, you have to pay. This is life, mate. It's real life, not what the regulators might think. So whichever way you go, if I have to develop systems, it's cost me a lot of money to develop those systems to automate it. But then the broker at the other end, he's not doing it for free.
No, I think you missed my point, but anyway, Ani, can I extend that to you?
Sure. So I think the quasi-definition of commodity is when marginal cost approaches 0, right? So ultimately that's about scale, and ultimately that's about being able to deliver that marginal value at a smallest marginal cost. So I think that's becoming easier as technology generally becomes easier per unit of transaction or per unit of service. So I think certainly there are some parts of what we deliver are becoming commoditized. I work in online broking, that's been commoditized over the last 10 years. So we've got to work hard at making sure we can do that piece, that unit of activity at a lowest marginal cost. And that's what we focus on. So it's really about trying to understand how we do that, how we deliver the technology, incremental technology, and innovate in that technology, but we do it in the most cost-effective way. So we're not adding a large component to that marginal cost.
Anantha?
I agree with Ani. It's a scale game. So the marginal cost, as it goes to 0, it come in. There are 2 ways we can get to 0 for these, what I call the utility pricing. One is if scale is so high, you can come down to cents and you're ready to do that. Or 2, you're getting something out of giving free. which means you can put in a value-added services on top, so basic things, items are removed, whether it's administration or trading or custody, whatever you say, but I take the cash and I keep all of the cash with me. That's one part, so I'm cross-subsidizing. Or the other one is I want the data, how you behave, what you do, because that data is going to help me propel to automate and bring in AI, so I would do that free. So it always comes down to marginal cost, which will go down, but ultimately, what am I going to get out of is to get more services on top.
Well, they're executives in big companies with deep pockets. I'm just a small businessman. If I get a margin, I'll make it, as long as I'm competitive. Why should I give it away for data and stuff like that? I'll get the data anyway later. But we're in the business of making money for our shareholders. I'm not in the business of doing charity, mate. So what we're saying is that you guys might have very deep pockets and you can keep subsidizing. If there's a margin for me to make and I can deliver a good service, plus additional stuff or whatever, and I can still make a margin on it, I'll make it.
I actually think you're all saying the same thing, Indy.
Well, I think you missed my point then.
No, don't agree.
Because that can't possibly be true.
Moving along, sorry, before I do, we've gotten engaged in this debate. We did promise you we were trying to have some vigorous debates, didn't we? Any questions from the room? Yeah, please. Beck.
It could be a comment, what's cheap is really good, what's good is really cheap. Here we have this race to the bottom on price, I just don't get it. The only danger is a punch change value. And I know in the business best, I've gone to this best later, I use that surveillance, and good administration works like the dog. Poor administration costs you so much money. So,
There was, I read something came out from Harvard, was if you can bring everything down and make it cheap, then which is the most expensive? Because that is the most expensive now.
I think Paul lost it.
Well, if everything is brought down in price, let's say it was 0.5, everyone's come down to 0.2, and that's cheap now, that's the cheapest. Well, there's nothing cheaper. So that's the most expensive.
I think the challenge we have is we now live in a world of freemium. So over time, clients have been trained to look for things that are free and cheap, and that's not in our industry, but that's it's across the world. Correct. So I understand that the assessment of value from a client is now more difficult to achieve because they're being approached every day, and we're having to compete with different industries now. So an example is, when we think about user interface on how a client's going to use our website to place a trade, we're not just comparing with CommSec or E-Trade. I'm comparing with Amazon and eBay, right? So the competitive set is not just finance anymore. The competitive set is every industry. And the same goes for value and pricing. So it's a bit more difficult, or we have a bigger challenge to be able to make sure we can demonstrate that value. And I talked about this yesterday. It's really, we have to demonstrate the value. Price is a part of that, but it's really about the value. It's not about the price. But we're also incumbent on ourselves and on how we can make our businesses more efficient so that there is margin to be made, Hindi, and we all want to make margin, but we have to actually look at ways that we can make ourselves more efficient so that we can still deliver value, and as price pressure comes from various sources, that we can still survive as sustainably profitable organizations.
Yeah, please, Chris.
One of the crazy things is that we've been dragged into this debate on pricing by virtue of the Royal Commission's focus on it. And it's taken the whole argument about service and performance in the wrong direction.
Exactly.
That's what I'm interested in, performance. When you go and buy something in a shop, you want to understand what it costs to be made, whether the wholesaler got to pay this, whether the shopkeeper got to pay that, what the rent was. You get the headline price. We should not be talking about the price. I mean, there's the whole point of retirement incomes and investment is about performance. Someone said to me the other night, if you look at the fee and then the fee comes off compounding over 10 years and you get this massive disparity. But the point is that the biggest contributor to long-term retirement benefits and wealth is about investment performance.
That's right.
I'm not talking about pricing. I mean, the other thing about pricing as well is that, particularly in the superannuation area for RSEs, you are a fiduciary, and you're a fiduciary beholden to APRA. And as a result of that, it can't go to zero. You have a different level of obligation. So it's not a commodity. I mean, some of the base function is, but not the overall responsibility. You are held to a much higher account to attract the concessional tax treatment that an RSE gets. So this debate's sort of getting into, you know, it's a good debate, but it's been sidetracked, and a lot of the Royal Commission's focused on pricing. It's completely the wrong direction.
I totally agree with you. In fact, the lady from Mercer, when she, Macquarie, did not even talk about the price. There was Don, I think, Dr. Don, whatever was there, he was talking, I think, to Paul, and they were talking about boards delivering returns, and I said, when do boards deliver returns, mate? You got to get someone to produce that. But did you hear that lady? And they said, yep. I said, did she ever talk about a fee or a price? She talked about value. And what clients want is value for their lifestyle and for their needs and goals. I also think, Arnie, that probably your client base is different to ours because you're going direct and you want the lowest common denominator or whatever. We deal with people who want value. As Chris did, you asked me yesterday, do you have a My Super fund? And I said, I'm not crazy, mate. Why would I want to have a My Super fund, which is totally regulated and you can't charge and you can't do this and you can't do that? I'm not. We deliver value. People who want value come to us. Our returns aren't too bad, as everyone's heard. And people are happy. So that's our benefit.
Actually, perhaps I will disagree with you just for once. But
That's rare, mate.
The My Super product that we run, it's perfectly profitable. It's overseen by APRA. And you know, the great myth is that regulators tried to push a pricing product like this called Stakeholder in the UK, set the price at 1%, and you know, it's been a wholesome failure. In Australia, the pricing on My Super hovers, I think, according to Chant West, at between 80 and 120, all up for investment transactions, everything, obviously no advice. So it's actually escalated the price. So My Super is still it's a good
Agreed.
default product.
Agreed that you may make a profit, but as far as I'm concerned, I don't want to be regulated by price.
No, but if you were to use My Super,
I had
My
to.
Super product,
I would have to, but we don't want to do that.
I think in the wholesale end of the thing, that's correct. But if you look at the lower end of it, if they save certain amount of money, which is up to 100,000, 200,000, and the fees and their costs takes a big chunk of it over the years, that becomes an argument. I think it depends on which end of the spectrum you discuss. So higher end in terms of wholesale and ultra high net worth, obviously the value and the service, how you add comes into play, which is pretty much
Right.
the field we do. But if you go into the lower end of the scale, it's definitely pricing there is an issue.
I think Michael
And
made
what-
sorry, go ahead. Michael made a comment yesterday, I think about $7,000 for a $100,000 or $100,000 client, and I met Michael and I said, look, who charges $7,000 for a $200,000 client, mate? We have young advisors who are dealing with young people who they've helped to grow from investing $200 and $300 a month to up to $150,000, and they might charge 1.2%. So, on the other hand, you say don't charge an asset-based fee. I said, well, if it's 200,000 or 100,000, you're charging $1,200, and you're giving them value. And if the asset falls, you earn less too. If it goes up, you earn more. Whereas you don't charge $7,000.
Well, that's a fun conversation, asset-based fees versus billable hours, which
That's right.
Which I think is the most conflicted revenue model I've ever encountered. And the problem with fixed fees is the information asymmetry. I mean, if a lawyer tells me it costs $10,000 to do this job, how would I know? I'm entirely in their hands as to
That's
whether
right.
that's an appropriate.
You just multiply 30 by 300 and there you get it, mate.
Yeah, but anyway, that's not officially the conversation for this panel. Just on the fees, I did have at hand some interesting. Rice Warner put out some material in there. If I actually wrote an article busting some of the myths of the Productivity Commission report, because The analysis that was done by the Productivity Commission on the costs and then comparing those costs to global they actually incorporated the insurance premiums in that cost, which I don't think is a fair or valid comparison. And also comparing to overseas, where they're predominantly defined benefit funds, it's a completely different cost structure for a defined benefit pension fund to ours. If you adjust for those, if you only adjust for insurance, in fact, we are actually very competitive in terms of fees. I know that most of the advisors I work with would be delivering platform plus fund manager for under 1%. And then there's their advice fee on top of that. But let me ask some, go back to the, let's move away from the entertaining, can we go to zero question, and just competition with self-managed super funds. Arnie, competition, complementary, all of the above?
I think there's a place for each of the different product offerings in the marketplace, and we're always going to have different segments of clients with different levels of sophistication and knowledge, and also a different level of objective. There's a large correlation for people who have their own SMSFs to control. So it's a big control driver rather than I'm going to achieve a better investment outcome through an SMSF. So there's a different motivation for people to create an SMSF. There wasn't that much of a bombshell, I don't think. So I think there's a place for each of those product offerings. I think, as we've talked about a little bit during the last day and a half, there's a whole lot of Australians who don't get advice today, who need to get advice. So how do we deliver a solution to them? In some of those cases, they're being pushed into an SMSF structure, and I don't necessarily believe that's the appropriate structure for them. But maybe one of the potential outcomes is the ability for people to shift in and out, and obviously legal and tax structures don't allow us to do that, but that's potentially an opportunity for someone to crack.
Just before, Anantha, overseas, SMSFs is pretty unique here, isn't it?
Well, that tax structure around it, yes, that's unique, but self-directed, it's pretty common. So that's what makes it different, as you pointed out, about the tax structures going in and out of that.
Yeah. Indy, you bump into them?
Look, it's the same story I said before, man. It's horses for courses. If people want to be able to say they can control. I remember when it came out, and David Smith, who was my initial partner, took it out, and there was a booklet, which it was called Do It Yourself Superannuation. So DIY Super. And he had little Lego things on top which said do it yourself. And eventually, as it got bigger, it looked silly, so they made it SMSF, Self-Managed Super Funds. It's people who want to believe they control it. Surprisingly, I think only about 9 or 11%, I think there was a survey, actually invest in self-managed super funds unadvised. The rest is generally advised through someone, through their financial planners. I know a few
I don't think that's true, Indy.
Okay, then that may be wrong data I've read, but I know the accountants get into it too, even though it's illegal. But it's a lot of it is advised by some planner, and people have a proper strategy of investment. Now, I was told that it's mostly in cash, but then now they're saying it isn't. Mike takes out data, super funds takes out data. It's all for people to read, but it's, you want to have a self-managed super fund and you believe good, it's good. I have money in my public offer super fund, and I have some money in a separate self-managed super fund where I could contribute equity or stuff like that. So it's a strategy.
And then, new competitors and substitutes. I'm particularly intrigued by the fact that there's, in this platform world, really there are potential substitutes. I know an advisor that spent a lot of money on Xplan, doesn't use the platform at all, actually has Xplan delivering what it's capable of. And
So maybe let me jump in if I can. So if we roll back to 1999, as you mentioned yesterday, I was part of the team that created the BT Wrap and launched the BT Wrap a long time ago. One of the thoughts we had way back then was that we would try and make the BT Wrap an industry utility and create a capability in the center of the market that allowed transactions between advisors and fund managers and ultimately the consumer, but use the technology to make that really simple. Unfortunately, during those early years, I think it was early 2001, 2002, BT Bankers Trust New York blew themselves up, and the local business in Australia was effectively sold, and BT ultimately found itself in the hands of Westpac. Interesting side, but one of the biggest opposers to the launch of BT Wrap when we were at BT was Rob Coombe, who ultimately ended up running BT, obviously. But what happened under the stewardship of Westpac was the Wrap platform became a closed platform. So it became very much, you've got to pay to be on the shelf, and it became ultimately, it didn't become an industry utility, so it didn't achieve the scale that we thought originally it could achieve. So one of the, I think, emerging opportunities in terms of competitor is the ASX, sadly. But the ASX launch of mFund is really an attempt to create an industry utility for the transaction of managed funds. Now, it's had a very, very slow start, largely because, it's quite, the industry is quite fragmented, so trying to get everybody to operate in the same way with same technology and same processes is difficult. But I see that as an opportunity to actually bring a new competitor to the platform market.
I think if you look at any of the operational aspect of any industry, most of the industries have been platformized. Whether you do global purchasing, there are availability. You want to do shopping, that's whether you want to go to eBay, whether you want to go Amazon, all of them is platformized. And that's going to happen in financial services. World over is exactly what most of the large deep-pocketed funds, private equity is doing, the large industry players, technologists doing it. It is going to happen. It's only a matter of time. All of the basic components of what we need to understand is available already. Let's take an example about risk profiling, investment profiling. It is, we haven't cracked it the way what is done. Look at the Myers-Briggs scenario where there's a type index. Simple, you can do a self-questionnaire answering in 25 minutes, answering about 50 questions. It tells you a type. You don't have to sit on a couch. If you're a high end of the wholesale side, you can sit on a couch and somebody's going to analyze it for you. You can pay for it. But filling out online, paying $2, you're going to get a Myers-Briggs index that tells you what your personality is, who you can match with, what you can do. Breast minds are working towards that, how to do personas on risk profiling, how to do personas on investment profiling. So come up with the 20 personas. I can do a questionnaire which allows me to match to that. Regulators buy it. There is a big data available now on how to behave and how to invest, how to manage it. Platform is happening. It is going to happen, and not necessarily, I hope it's in Australia because I moved here, but it is going to happen, and world over the best minds are working on it. We saw about how it's going to happen, how an image generated of a human being looks like. All of that is going to go into play, whether it's a persona-driven big data in terms of risk profiling and risk reporting, that is going to happen. It's just a matter of time. So competition, yes. Where it is going to come from, I don't think it's going to be the incumbent players. You cannot invest so much money, resources, minds, you need to put that when your core business is not running platform. And that can only technologists, platform players can do it.
I totally agree with you on the first point in terms of platform. I mean, today they're talking of ecosystems of business, which are all platformized, that you have a platform of business which interact together. So I think platforms bring a lot of economies of scale. And to try and do it on your own for individuals with different asset allocations, with different needs, with different competing requirements, different time requirements, becomes extremely difficult. And a platform actually makes that a lot easier. As far as getting a persona test or whatever, find out who you are, I think I look like Tom Cruise, but I don't. And my kids want to have face changes and stuff like that. Plastic surgery to change their noses and things. But look, what we do is when we have we don't call it a fact find anymore. We call it client goals and financial goals and aspirations check. Financial goals is what people want to achieve, and aspirations are what they'd like to have. And everyone wants to have $1 million in the least possible time, but they want to invest in cash. Now, you completed that survey, it's the start of a dialogue. That's what happens in financial planning. You can go into a computer and say, this is what I am, this is what I want, and you'll press 4 buttons and off they'll say, put it into an ETF and you'll make so much money. But that's not actually who you are, and what you need is quite different to what you feel you are. And therefore it's important to have that discussion and lead to something that will actually help you achieve your goals. That's the slight difference with these modeling
I think
and
it's
stuff.
completely, I disagree with that one.
Good. That's what
I
makes
think
a market, man.
where it's going to do is, the platform business is not creating towards giving face time. You book in Amazon, how many people do you encounter? If you go to a shop, you have to encounter, then you need a face time. So the question is, how do you increase the productivity of your minds to enable them to use the technology to reach 100,000 people, 200,000 people, million people, not having FaceTime? There will be a market to do wholesale on FaceTime. I'm not talking about the market, but I'm talking about the mass market of reaching and enabling or financial inclusion, including advisory business, and that's what is going to make a difference. And that's where platforms are going to play.
Just before we get to the end, last call for questions from the room. Join the debate. I have cough lozenges if you're stuck.
There's a question about
Yep, down the back there.
Liam O'Brien's my name, from GRC Solutions. There was a slide I think that Michael put up about lack of trust in the industry. Indy, you're saying that people need the FaceTime with their clients. That seems to have led to that excessive lack of trust. What gives us greater confidence in robo-advice and more scalable models?
Is that to me? Yep.
To the panel, but what my point is that you're saying that the consumer needs FaceTime. FaceTime has let the consumer down dramatically. Can robots be trusted any more than humans?
I think, as I said yesterday, actually it depends on what people want to hear and perceive. Financial planning is supposedly the rogue industry. If you read the normal media, you tell me right now that 9 out of 10 lawyers are going to cost you money. 1 out of 2 barristers will definitely cost you money. And the guy who charges you $15,000 an hour and hits you for 150 grand will lose the case to a guy who charges $3,500, and then they'll go out to lunch at your cost. Mate, doctors. There's a friend who I know, I have a personal information of. The doctor changed his prescription, he started bleeding in his brain, and no doctor will stand up and say it was wrong. Financial planners have been maligned always. There was mismanagement, there was incorrect reporting to ASIC, there was all that kind of stuff's going on every time.
Indy, I'm not suggesting that other professions don't have an issue. I'm suggesting that there's a massive perception issue in our industry.
I'm coming to.
So I'm not sure why that's relevant.
Well, I'm coming to that. The point is that we are compared with others, and I think Paul at the last year also said, are we a profession? And my question is, I think we are. My answer is we are, because it's as good as saying a builder is part of a profession, and I don't know how many people have used a builder and are extremely happy. Is carpet laying a profession? It's what you believe. The media does not like it because the people do not want to take responsibility for their own decisions. It's always someone else's fault. There were 5 cases in this Royal Commission of bad advice. 5 cases. Going back, as I said, 15 years, there would be, till 2015, there would be about 15 million pieces of advice given. They take out 5. One wasn't even executed, the woman who was in a defined benefit fund. And they say the whole industry is banned.
So you're trying to suggest that we've just got a PR problem and there's no
We have a
more
serious PR problem. You're absolutely right. A serious PR problem because we bloody fight against each other too.
I think it's a,
That's only half the question, though.
That is only half the question.
Two other guys who can answer.
Maybe I can jump in.
Samantha, perhaps, or Arnie, perhaps you can talk more about the scalable robo side of it. And can the robots be trusted more than the humans? Or can they, perhaps I term it slightly differently, can they create a more favourable perception of our industry than we've managed to do as humans?
I think it comes back to a point, sorry, no, that Mike raised a little earlier. I think the trust issue is really about asymmetry, symmetry of information, and that's where, and the media hasn't helped, obviously, but that's where I think that this trust issue has come from. I don't necessarily think that robots will fix that, because that's a perception that clients now have with the industry. And let's not kid ourselves that behind each robot is a person anyway, right? So it's really about fixing the asymmetry of information, and it's about the transparency, and it's about how you can demonstrate value. And it's not going to happen overnight. I think these things happen, and the pendulum has gone to one extreme. It'll come back to the middle at some point, but that's the opportunity for us from where we are now as an industry.
And after closing comment?
I agree with what he said about the trust. It's going to take time. That's clear. Coming back to the robo-advisory part, I think people are just dabbling in it. There is no region has got robo-advisors replacing advisors anywhere. Ultimately, it's people's own money. The technology can tell what it is. At some point in time, at least the generation which is controlling the wealth wants to hear a human voice, wants to have an interaction with a human. This will change as the transition of assets happen to the next generation. But current generation, robo-advisors cannot replace the advisors.
Well, can I ask you to join me in thanking our panel for a vigorous conversation?